Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tevach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in schus and merit and honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Alevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Hashalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zevi Cheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz Le'erich Yom V'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. And in schus of all the Eden, our brothers and sisters in Eretz HaKodesh and everywhere in the world, Hashem should protect them, and above all protect the holy soldiers who sacrificed their lives to defend and protect the hostages, have them all released immediately, total nitzachon, and marching into the Geula Hamitis V'Hashlema. So we are middle of chapter 19, Perik Yutes, learning about the inherent love, the Ava Mesuteres, and continuation of explaining what the very nature of this love is, this natural inclination, the natural connection that every neshama, every Yid has, every Jew has, the expression of the Alter Rebbe elsewhere. A Yid nicht will, nicht kann sein abgerissen von Elikus. A Jew not he wants and not he's able to be torn away from godliness, God forbid. In the language of the Rambam, the end of chapter 2, in Hilchas Gedushin, in Mishnah Torah, Yad HaChazakeh, where he speaks about Yitzrei Hu Sha'anseh, that when a person doesn't do what the Torah wants, it's his Yetzer Hara that's forcing him, because every Jew naturally wants to do mitzvahs and wants to avoid daily avedas. The question is, where does this come from? This is not based on a rational process. It comes from our very nature. Just like a person has a nature to love life and not, God forbid, do anything to destroy one's own life. We're talking about a healthy person. So this is the very nature of the neshama is to gravitate to and connect to its source. Ne'er Hashem nishmas adam. So that's the inyana, that's the inyan of this Ava Mesuteres, which comes to us a Yerusha, inherited from the Ovis, as we learned in chapter 18. And there he also explained the root of it, Chochma shebenefesh. That Chochma is the bridge, is the interface between Eirei Seif Baruch Hu, which resides in Chochma, and that then from there spreads into Bina and all the other faculties. And that's what we learned and continue to learn. So this is not irrational, based on rational cognitive and contemplation. It's the very nature of the person. Additionally, we learned, and we're in the middle of learning, that this is true about Kol Sita de Grusha, everything. This klal, he said, V'zel klal b'chol sita de Grusha. That's the rule, that's the principle, the governing principle in everything that's connected to Kedusha. That she'ein ela mashanim shel mechachma. Everything Kedusha is what comes from Chachma, Kodesh Elyon, as he said. Kodesh Elyon. As the Zohar says, Kodesh mila begamei. It's a word of its own. When you say Kodesh or Kedusha, you say Ish Kodesh. You're saying a person that's holy, a holy person, a holy object. But you don't see Ish, that's Kodesh, not Kodesh. The Vav before the Dalet, that's Kodesh mila begamei. It's completely separate. And that because Chochma is the place where Ein Sof resides, and Ein Sof is completely beyond everything. And Chochma is the way that manifests and channels into our being. And why Chochma? Because Chochma is botel, b'mitzias be'Ein Sof Baruch Hu ha'malubash bei. So something that's completely suspends itself, doesn't have any identity of its own, is the perfect keli, the perfect channel. The channel, the Eirei Seh Baruch Hu, that's beyond all structure. Ve'ein dover b'fnei atzmei kanal. And it's not an entity of its own, and that's why it's called Chochma. As we learned earlier. Chochma. Bittel. Utter bittel. V'nochnu ma. And this brings us back to a theme that was discussed earlier. in chapter 6, when he spoke about Kedusha. So we talk about Kedusha, we'll say the word holy, sacred. What does that really mean? So he explained it's Kedusha Havdalah Prisha. It means it's separate from, it's beyond, it's outside of, and not affected, that not, what's the word? It does not assume the properties of chayil, of the mundane. But we're here learning it's much more than that. It's the bittul that allows for that kedusha to reside, for elikus to reside, like the Gemara says, the Eibishter says about an arrogant person, I and him cannot be shared b'tachas kfif achas. We can't exist under one canopy. Because when a person is filled with their ego and themselves, there's no room for anything else. To be able to manifest the elikus, you have to empty yourself. And that's the bittul of Chochma, is the utter bittul that Chochma has, that allow that. Therefore, Ein Baruch is melubish, as we also learned in chapter 18, and it's not an entity of its own, koyachma. Now, we mentioned also, what about the other spheres of Atzilus? So, B'chlal, all the spheres of Atzilus are really that way. It says, Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad. But at the same time, we also say that Chochma dominates in Atzilus. That's why it says in Tikkun Zeir, it says, Chochma mekanano b'Atzilus. Bina mekanano b'Kursaya. Bina nests, Kursaya is in the world of the throne, B'riya. So Mides is mekanano b'Yitzirah. Is nests in Yitzirah. Malchus mekanano b'Asiyah. Nests in Asiyah. But Chochma is mekanano b'Atzilus. That's why all of Atzilus is under the effect of Chochma. But when you break it down by Proteus in detail, it's the Chochma of Atzilus that is the channel between Keser and between Les Machshav Tfisa Beklal, that which is beyond Seichel and Seichel, like we explained in earlier chapter 18 and also as well as here. So there's the process of experiencing godliness based on a logical process. You contemplate, you emotionally connect to something greater and you want to be drawn to it. That's a tremendous level. We learned about that in the Aveda of Isbananus, that leads to give birth to Midas back from chapter 3 and all the way through chapter 17, including 17. But now we're talking about Alamayla Metam Vadas Ava Musateres, that's beyond the rational, super conscious. Where you're not doing it for anything but being connected, like the flame. It just wants to be in its source. The neshama wants to connect to its source. It doesn't have to be logical. Alamayla Metam Vadas. So he's saying now, Kol Sita de Kedusha is also that way. But to appreciate it, he's not going to explain what's the other side. That's Sita de Kedusha. So the contrast is very clear. So now the Alter Rebbe continues. For hu heipach mamish mebchinas haklipa v'sitra achra. That's Sita de Kedusha. This is the diametric opposite of klipa sitra achra, the husks. The husk is an identity, a husk, a shell, that conceals the fruit within. And sitra achra, which means the other side. So what's the diametric opposite of Kedusha, of bittul, is the opposite of bittul. Self, ego, arrogance. And now he takes us back to what we learned in the end of chapter 1 when he spoke about Klippas Nega and then Shlosh Klippas Atmeis. We talked about Goyishkeit, that what ultimately is the archetype, that is the opposite of Kedusha, is paganism. Shememenu Nefashos U'Maseilam, which produced the souls of the archetypal nations of the world, the Avdin Ligarmaihu, who are self-serving. And as we learned there at length, everybody can be self-serving. But that's what typifies, what personifies, that's what we call Nefashos of U'Maseilam. When Avram Avinu chose to leave the pagan world and to embrace God. This is exactly the transition he went through. From a self-interest-oriented life, which he's going to describe now, to a life of Kedusha. Not me, but to be a channel for the divines of that which is beyond me. Omrin. And what does this Klippa Sitra Achra say? Have. There's a pasuk in Mishlei, in the book of Proverbs, Lamed Tezvav, 30:15. Have. This is to say, give me. Give. Have. It's about taking, giving, give me. It's all about me. Everything in this world. To quote a scholar known as one of the radical atheists, Richard Dawkins, just want to use, he uses it as a book called The Selfish Gene. That the very gene is have, is selfish. Everything about your own preservation, survival of the fittest. The language of Torah, give me, have. V'haliteni. And this is the expression that Esav says to Yaakov, feed me. This is in the Parsha Vayetze, it says in the Chafhei Lamed 25:30, feed me. It's all about a parasitical, taking attitude. The arrow is pointing this way. Everything is to serve myself. Why? Due to the fact that we're talking about an entity, the ultra opposite, diametric opposite of Kedusha, a self-serving mentality caused by the feeling of ego and separateness. Yesh v'dover b'fnei atzmei. In contrast to what we learned just a few lines earlier, that what's in Kedusha? Ein a dover b'fnei atzmei. It's not a self-contained entity. Its whole being is to channel something greater, greater reality. This lies at the essence of the difference between selflessness and selfishness. And selfishness can be, not necessarily means that right away is destructive, but ultimately it's about a self, separate from, an independent reality. Whereas Kedusha is all about channeling something beyond, it's not about me. And even when it's me searching godliness, that still could be a self, that I want it. So I'm ready to give up, let's say, a very material desire for a spiritual desire, but still the self. Have haliteni. V'yesyesh v'dover b'fnei atzmei. Heifach b'chinas ha-chochma. The opposite of the character and personality of Chochma. Koyach ma, what? Not about me. It's suspending the self to draw down, to channel something higher than the self. Now, this theme was discussed earlier, but you see it all coming together because now he wants to bring it in context of the Chochma Shebenefesh and the Gedusha that we look for and we seek and how we create a keli to manifest Chochma. Because remember, even though we have Chochma Shebenefesh, we still need to manifest it. When the animal soul dominates, basically what's being dominated is the animal, the self. I want something. The impulsive desires. Chochma is appreciating, channeling something beyond ourselves. And we're going to soon see how that also manifests in the Kedusha that we bring into the world. And the Alter Rebbe continues to explain this further. Ulechein, Nikroi Mesim. Therefore, for this reason, the forces of the other side, of the husks, are referred to as dead. This is from the Zohar Cheli Gimel, Reish Ayin Hei Amud Aleph, 275a. You also find that sometimes a mosquito, or an aluka, a leech, a bloodsucker, that's meitzi machnis ve'ena meitzi. It takes like a parasite. That's why it's called a parasite, and doesn't give anything in return. Called an aluka. in Zoyar Chelik Aleph Kufyir Aleph 111a. So in that sense, that's why it's called Mesim. They're referred to as dead. Why? Ki ha-chochmeh techaya. The pasuk says, Chochma gives life. Remember, Chochma. This is Kehelas Zayin Yud Beis 7:12. Another pasuk the Alter Rebbe brings proof that Chochma gives life because of his bittul. Bittul draws life. Another pasuk, V'ksiv Yamusu v'loi b'Chochma. The verse states, they die without Chochma. This is in Iyuv Dalet Chof Aleph 4:21. Why do they die without Chochma? So let's think of it physically. When, God forbid, there's a blockage that doesn't allow the blood to flow properly through the arteries and the veins, what can that lead to? Lead to a stroke, could lead to death. Life is defined by a free flow. There has to be an element of bittul. If something gets clogged, something gets stuck, and it's not letting other things flow through, that means to think of it as it's like ego, arrogance. It's about me. A healthy body is not about you. It's all the channels have to be open to allow things to flow through. I'm talking about even physically. How much more so spiritually? So what's the channel for life? Is bittul. Is when your body is doing its functions, but it's allowing things to flow from one part to the other. If every organ and every part of the body decided to take care of its own needs and not interact in a dynamic, symbiotic connection, it would lead to problems, to death. So death is essentially disconnection. And life is connection. And connection comes from being a channel to allow the life through. In spiritual terms, that's Chochma. Chochma gives life, but the Alter Rebbe brings both sides. It gives life, and when you don't have Chochma, it brings death. They die without Chochma. So life is all about interconnectedness, a flow, a cross-pollination, if you wish, where everything is feeding each other. Anyone that stops in nature, where one creature or one species decides, all I'm going to do is take and not give. It's a give and take. That's what nature is all about. That's what everything healthy is all about. It's a give and take. They all work together in one flow, or else the whole organism dies. Now that flow is, I'm talking about even physically, obviously is rooted in the source of life, and that's the divine. So you want to have divine life within you? You need Chochma. And that's why Chochma is connected to everything from Kedusha, goes through Chochma. That's what brings life. And now the Alter Rebbe continues. Now he's going to explain it in terms of what we spoke earlier about people. How does that manifest in human beings? He says, V'chein harashoyim apeishi Yisrael. And that's and also the Rishoyim, the wicked and the sinners of Israel, they too are called Mesim. Like we know, Rishoyim gam b'chayim kruim Mesim. Also in their lifetimes they're called dead. Why are they called dead? They can be biologically alive, they can be healthy, they can be powerful. But that's biological life. If you're talking about true life is not just functioning and existing. It's channeling a higher force, a higher reality within you. Now, the Alter Rebbe adds. Now, this is all. Well, before we go there, let me just say one more thing. They don't feel the level of Chochma. We learned earlier in chapter 18 that even they will be Meiser Nefesh. So that's what Alter Rebbe now Bavorans. That's as long as there's a status quo, routine life. So that Chochma Sheba Nefesh can remain concealed, can remain dormant. So all this on condition before that dormant love gets activated and triggered, and they are put to the test to sanctify God's name. Why is this the case? Because the level of Chochma in the divine soul, im nitzutz alakus, which houses a spark of godliness, from the infinite divine light. Remember, Chochma channels the infinite divine light in the nitzutz of the nefesh alakis. Heim bebchinas golus begufam. It's in a state of exile, of displacement in their bodies. So they have it there. It's there. But it could be like a pile of flame that's completely trapped. Think of a black hole that doesn't let the light escape. So it means blocked, exiled, displaced. But nefesh habamis, in their animal soul, mitzad haklipa, shebechol asmoli shebelav, which comes from the husks, as we learned at the end of chapter 1, which is on the left side of the heart, the left chamber. Hameleches umeshelas begufam, that rules and dominates in their bodies, like we learned earlier in Tanya. So the Chochma is there, but it's trapped. It's in exile. It's displaced. And he continues, B'seid golus hashchina. The concept of golus hashchina. So it's not just the soul. The soul comes from a nitzutz alaki. So even the Shechina, which refers to the divine as it manifests, Shechenus mislabeshes, it's called the secret of the Shechina's exile, Kenis Galil, as mentioned above. We learned about this earlier in chapter 17. So the Gemara says in Megillah, B'chol mokim shegalu, wherever the Jews were exiled, Shechina imam. The Shechina was with them. What is the Shechina referring to, says Chassidus? It's calling on the spark of the divine that manifests, which is the Chochma Shebenefesh, which is in every soul. But when the animal soul and the materialism of this world dominates, the Shechina also, of Yachal, so to speak, also goes into an exile. Meaning it's displaced. So even though the Rishonim and Pesach Yisrael have a Ava, Tivis, a natural love of Misoteres, but it's been displaced. In the Gesed Golas Hashchina. So now the Alter Rebbe continues and says, Ulechein nikras Ava zu b'nefesh alikis. That's why he's going to go back to now why it's called hidden, concealed, or dormant love. If it's very much part of us, so why is it dormant? Why is it hidden? It says, that this is why this natural and inherited love of the divine soul, whose will and desire is to connect, to cleave to God, the giver of life, life of life. This is why it's called Ava Misoteres, hidden love, dormant love. Because it is hidden and covered by the sackcloth garment of klipa, of the husk. So think of a fruit that's trapped within its husk and shell, and you don't see the fruit. It's hidden and covered by people who are sinners of Israel. Because of their sins, it covers it all up. Umimeno, and it's from this klipa, from this husk, nichas b'em ruach shtus, that enters within them a moment of insanity, a delusional spirit, ruach shtus, a type of, a moment of disconnect, of dissonance, lachte, which causes them to sin. Any healthy person would never put their hand in fire. If someone puts their hand in fire, it's either there's something wrong with them, they don't know it's fire, they don't know that it burns, or something wrong, something's off. The same thing, a nefesh alikis, a divine soul would never do something to disconnect from its source of life. Would somebody go ahead and cut off their source of oxygen, their oxygen flow? Never. But a ruach shtus, ein adam ever aver elim ken nichnas by ruach shtus. A person sins only because of a ruach shtus, like the Gemara says in Seit in the beginning, 3a. Ein adam chayte, like he says. Umich ben nichnas beim ruach shtus lachte, kamaymer abesenu zal. Ein adam chayte. And a man will not commit a sin unless there's a ruach shtus, a delusional spirit, a type of dissonance that enters him. So that ruach shtus is what covers up and conceals the chochma shebenefesh, that natural love. That's why it's called concealed. It's concealed like within sackcloth. It's like trapped. This is the essential dissonance. But then he's going to continue to explain that's initially the case. But remember, we learned when push comes to shove, the person is challenged, even the Kal Shebekalim and Peish Yisrael will also have the Mesiras Nefesh, in most cases. Because they have that Amunah, but it's concealed. So you need something to challenge them. So now he continues and says, now that we know it's exiled, with the dissonance, but it's never extinguished. That takes us back to the very essence of every Yid, Karevei Lecha, that everyone has that spark. Ela shegolos hazeh, the b'chinas Chochma. However, this exile, to the level of Chochma, that Chochma is in exile, and that's why we don't access, or it's concealed, that connection to the divine, a person can sin. Ein el leb'chinas hamispashetes b'mena b'nefesh kula la'achyeseh. Is only true of our Chochma's expression, or Chochma's extension, you can say. Spashtusim mimena. And its influence on the rest of the soul. Aval sheidish ve'ikar shel b'chinas Chochma shebenefesh. Elikis. But the root and core of the divine, not as it's extending into the rest of the person, the root and core, the very core of it remains untrapped. It remains in the mind. And it doesn't actually manifest and become exiled and enmeshed in the sack the klipa, in the sackcloth garment of klipa in the heart's left chamber. So though it's concealed, and it doesn't have an effect on the person, but it's not lost. It's like a pilot flame that remains there, like a black hole. The light is there, but it can't yet escape. And now he's going to continue to describe more about it, and then how we actually draw from it. So you have here literally the dynamics of how a soul works. Even a soul that gets trapped and exiled, the Seid Golos Hashchina. But the key thing to remember is the hope that you definitely can wake up that dormant love and bring it forth, as we shall continue to learn the next year. So we'll stop here. TanyaApplied.com. You can find this and all previous programs. Gute Woche. Kol Tuf.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.